Hello and welcome to another edition of Deep Dives at the Petersen Automotive Museum. My name is Leslie Kendall. I'm the chief historian here, and today we're going to talk about a vehicle that everybody knows about, but nobody knows really where it came from. Now, during the late 30s and early 40s, it became pretty obvious to the military that they were going to need a small vehicle to get around in quickly, something that was nimble, something that was four-wheel drive, something that was more capable than the motorcycles that they had been kind of relying on up until that time. And before that, it was horses. So you could tell kind of where the military's mind was. And the call went out for a kind of vehicle that met certain specifications. They had to be a certain weight, they had to be under a certain weight, they had to be a certain horsepower, they had to be certain dimensions, and they had to be easy to repair, easy to build, easy to fix, repairable on the field, just in case anything happened. The first company that came up with the idea of anything resembling a Jeep was American Bantam. And this is a company that was derived from the American Austin company, who actually built British Austin 7s under license here in America. And so what they said, hey, we're building small cars anyway. We're about what they're looking for. Let's make one. Let's see what we can do. So they did. They made a small vehicle that looks an awful lot like this. Already, but it had a rounded nose, it had helmet fenders, still it was very car-like. And they thought, you know what, that's not a bad start, but let's go a little deeper. So that's what they did. The military put out a call, and about 135 companies were approached, and only two came to the fore. And one was Willys, and the other was Bantam, who had built it in the first place. So when the government put out a contract, Willys and Bantam replied. They were the only ones, but the government said, you know what, it's a really good idea, and we know that you guys can make these, but you can't make enough of them. So they asked Ford to come in. And ultimately, there were two versions of the Jeep at the beginning. There was a Willys version, which this one is a Willys, and there was a Ford version. And what's interesting is that the early ones said Willys or Ford on the back. And the government took a look at that and said, you know what, I don't want that happening. I mean, if you look at civilian roads on the day, there've always been, Chevy versus Ford, Buick versus Oldsmobile, all these kind of friendly rivalries. And they didn't want that happening on the battlefield. They didn't want people, soldiers to say, well, I've got a Willys Jeep, I'm better than you. You only have a Ford, or I've got a Ford and yours must be worse. We're all in this together, gang. It's a one-fits-all vehicle. And especially since the parts happen to be interchangeable. You can't be out on a battlefield and worry about how many hundreds of thousands of parts you're going to need for your particular kind of vehicle. Now, the idea of building these was to keep it simple. And although it was a simple design, it still took a lot of manufacturing capability to produce them in the quantities that were needed. Willys produced quite a few in the very beginning, and American Bantam also produced a couple of thousand. It was contracted to do so. And then the government said, yeah, American Bantam, you're great, but we have other plans for you. So American Bantam actually ended up building trailers that the Jeeps towed, and they even built torpedo components. So they were useful, but for other things. Willys and Ford built the lion's share of these Jeeps. Now, as long as we're talking about Jeep, why don't we talk about where the name came from? A lot of people don't know. I don't think anybody knows for sure, but there are three basic ideas. One was that it's a contraction of GPW, which are letters that stand for certain specifications that the vehicle had to have met. Some people think it was a contraction of GP, Jeep, again, a specification, general purpose vehicle for the military, the Army, the Navy, whoever was going to need it. And the other was based on a cartoon character called Eugene the Jeep. Eugene the Jeep was a flexible, limber creature that could go over anything, that could tackle any obstacle, that could beat its way through any problem. And in a way, that seems the most appropriate name for this vehicle because that's exactly what it proved that it could do. Well, why would the military need these anyway? Well, think of the circumstances of the day. It was the 40s going into 1941, and there was war brewing in Europe. In fact, war had broken out, and the United States was looking at the battlefield and thinking, we really need something. We need a troop carrier. We need a reconnaissance vehicle. We need an ambulance, a radio truck, something that can do any or all of these functions. And for a time, it was thought that a motorcycle would be able to do that. The United States looked to Europe again, and they saw Germany using motorcycles. They saw other countries using motorcycles because they were nimble. You could get between the trees, you can get over humps, you could do what you needed. And with the sidecar, maybe you could carry armaments, you could carry a machine gun if you needed to. They were almost endlessly adaptable. But keep in mind that even though you had three wheels, only one of them was powered. So what the military decided is that it needed a four-wheeled vehicle that every wheel drove. The front wheels drove if you wanted them to. The rear wheels drove. It just depended on the terrain. It depended on the action that you were expecting that day. What makes the Petersen Automotive Museum's Jeep so interesting is that it was built before Pearl Harbor, less than a week before Pearl Harbor, less than a week before we declared war. And it represents the earliest precursor to what we know today as a small SUV. It was one of the very earliest, built by Willys, one of the companies that helped define the Jeep, and the company that ultimately owned the rights to the name. Now, technically, this model is a 1941 MB Willys Jeep. That denotes a very early variety that is called a slat grille version. And the slat grille designation comes from this thin pieces of metal that go up and down and compose the grille. Later versions used a grille that was modified by Ford to make one simple stamping that covered the entire front, headlights and all, ended up having 7 slats in the front, 9 at first and then 7 later. Now, when the Army talks practical, it means practical. It means that this vehicle had to do everything. The windshield had to go up or down depending on what you were expecting to counter. It had a top that was very easily put up and removed. The gas tank was right where you could see it. You pull up the front cushion, you reach through the little hole, you undo the gas filler cap, and you fill it up. Not a very large tank, but large enough to get you where you needed to go and back again. Other details included a provision for carrying equipment. Now you could put a machine gun in the back, you could put ambulance litter in the back, you could do lots of different things, you could carry lots of different components. You could also carry what everybody was going to need eventually, a shovel and a pickaxe. If you had to get yourself out of a problem, this was probably the only way you're going to do it. Now, if you're looking at the interior and thinking, boy, is that stark, you're forgiven, because it is. This is the very definition of form follows function. It's everything it needs to be, nothing more. You don't even get chrome. You get olive drab painted controls, olive drab dashboard. You get a black steering wheel, black horn button, black knobs on the gear shift and the four-wheel drive mechanism. But everything else is green, olive drab green, and that was the preferred color of the Army. To make this as immediately usable and as immediately understandable as possible, the controls had to be very basic, and they had to be very, very well described. For example, you have a light switch, lights, a choke switch. For choke, a throttle button that allows you to control how fast the engine runs. Panel lights, and you've got a couple of lights right here that are directed downward. Lights are not in the gauges like a lot of modern vehicles, like virtually every modern vehicle. They're above. The bulbs are easy to change that way, much easier to change. And you have a handbrake coming out of the dashboard. And the levers on the floor, I think, bear a little explanation too. Now, the headlights bear mentioning because you could drive this car theoretically with the headlights off and use only the blackout lights. that are affixed at the bottom. The lights through a beam that was theoretically less visible to the enemy from above or far away. Well, the Jeep, again, we're talking practicality here. And there's something called a ramp angle, or an angle of attack, that is very favorable for this vehicle, because if you're approaching a hill, a mountain, a little rise in the terrain, you don't want a vehicle that's low. You want something that can hit it at an angle. And this Jeep has tires that are placed very, very forward, and a bumper that's placed forward, but also higher than you would probably expect on a modern vehicle because of the ramp angle and the clearances that you had to expect to have. Well, in terms of practicality, if you've got a bumper that's sticking out, you might as well not let it go to waste. Why not put it to work carrying something? And this could indeed be employed to carry weapons, ammunition, medical supplies. In this case, interestingly, this is labeled pure bullion. Theoretically, this was to be taken into battle with gold, which was to be used as a trading element. When you're out in a jungle, when you're out in the desert, when you're out in the middle of a field somewhere, you're not going to be able to, peel a couple of 20s off of, out of your wallet and give it to somebody, who you need maybe a tire repaired, or you need an axle bent back into shape. You had to use what was universally acceptable as currency, and that in the day was gold. Moving along the side of the Jeep and coming rearward, you notice that, again, everything is about practicality. Everything is about not letting space go to waste. And they use the sidebars for bags. Again, they could carry anything. They could carry ammunition. They could carry meals. They could rations. They could carry medical supplies. They could carry anything. You move around the back. You've got hand grips just in case. You never know when you're going to need to pull the Jeep, perhaps out of a problem with a winch, or maybe people can help you push it, or maybe they just need to hang on to something if they're inside bouncing around bumpy terrain. Come around, again, you've got taillights, which you would expect to see. You also have blackout taillights, which, just like the front, were intended to throw a beam in such a way that wasn't obvious to the enemy. Now, something very utilitarian and unusually practical about the Jeep is its windshield and its ability to fold flat. When it was folded flat, you wanted to have a cover on it if you were expecting it not to be used for a while. So the idea was when you were expecting to go maybe a little bit fast, you wanted a windshield, you simply moved it up. And then you get one of your compatriots to help you take it off. Once you got the cover off, the windshield fell into place, and you anchored it with these two levers, one on the passenger side, the other on the driver's side. To leave the windshield frame in place but move the glass, what you would do is loosen the knobs, one on each side of the windshield. Then you unscrew the knob on the passenger side. Once you've done that, you can push it out with help from the driver, and then latch it, make sure that it's in place, make sure it's secure, and you can see all the way through. If you didn't need that, for example, you could reverse the process. You could unscrew this mechanism and tilt the windshield back down. And it latches into place the same way it came undone. Again, simplicity. When you were out in the battlefield, I don't think many soldiers wanted to worry about whether the windshield wiper fuse was going to blow or some mechanism failed. So these were manually operated windshield wipers. Now, it can be regarded as a bit of a nuisance, but at least you didn't have to worry about another thing going wrong with your vehicle. To open the engine, they didn't want you to worrying about confusing latches and cables and that sort of thing. So they had very simple spring-loaded mechanism, hooks, one on each side. The hood opened wide. And they didn't have to worry, again, about a prop rod. You just let the hood fall back onto the windshield header, and it was where it was protected by these two bumpers that prevented it from scratching and wearing through. Well, a lot of people are wondering, what are the specifications of this Jeep? Exactly what can it do? Well, it's heavier than you would think it would be. Its gross weight is 3,650 pounds. Even though it's a very short vehicle, 132 inches total. Now, the engine was as simple as you could possibly get for a vehicle of the day. It's a 4-cylinder, flathead engine with about 60 horsepower and provided about 105 or so foot-pounds of torque. It had one carburetor for simplicity, and if you wanted to, and for certain applications, a snorkel was available that took air, that would channel air from above the passengers' heads into the carburetor. And that was for beach landings and river crossings and things where the mechanism was expected to be completely underwater, at least for a small period of time. The Jeep under hood is just as bare bones as it is on the outside. You look inside, even the engine is green. Certain other components are black, but everything was easy to get to. The point was to make this a very, very understandable vehicle. When you're done under hood, you simply dropped it, latched it back into place. And an interesting provision is that this can serve as a table. If you needed to put something on it, if you needed to lay something down, it was useful for that. It was a flat surface that normally carried nothing. Now, a lot of people back on the home front had to ration. They had to ration gasoline because gasoline was channeled to the war effort, and they had to ration rubber, which meant that tires were very difficult to get during World War II, and you had to be a priority customer in order to get them. This is where all the rubber went, to the vehicles that were on the battlefield. Just like the rest of the vehicle, the tires are as simple as it is possible to make them. The tread is a very understandable pattern. They're easy to get on and off. Interestingly, they had a locking mechanism on the back. The name Willys is derived from John North Willys, an American entrepreneur who made small cars during the 1930s and morphed into making small battlefield vehicles in the 40s. And talking about a Jeep gives us another opportunity to tell all our servicemen and women out there, thank you for your service. Thank you for watching another edition of Petersen Automotive Museum Deep Dives. My name is Leslie Kendall. I'll see you later.